Welcome to the American Contrarian, your weekly update on the fall of civilization, hosted by me, the degenerate conservative. This week in the apocalypse, neocons and libs launch nuclear distraction towards Russian troops on Ukrainian border and away from the spiraling inflation, wave of violent crimes, and a deteriorating race relations within the country. 2 major school shootings in 2 months, one shooter white, the other black. The completely random stabbing and murder of 14-year-old Ryan Rogers in Florida, and more. The first story is the threat of nuclear war with Russia. U.S. Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi, urged Biden not to take the first strike nuclear option off the table regarding the reported tens of thousands of Russian troops on Ukraine's border, and Biden hasn't, because we all know how seriously the Biden administration takes border security. What's really scary about this is it's one of the issues the Republicans and Democrats are in agreement on. That's basically the deal with the devil you make when you vote for a lot of Repubs. They'll leave you alone as long as you let them bomb somebody on the other side of the planet. Let's listen to this clip from a Republican show speaking to a Democrat demonstrating the non-establishment take of the situation.
Tulsi Gabbard's thought a lot about this. Of course, a former congressman from Hawaii, currently lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserves. She joins us. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming on. Does what's happening in eastern Ukraine, whatever you think of it, constitute a core American interest, do you believe?
No. Look at what Senator Wicker is saying. I want to go back to that for a second here, because anyone who would propose or even consider what he is saying as an option must be insane, a sociopath, yes, or a sadist. Because let's just understand here. So he's saying, let's go and launch a nuclear attack that would start a war that would destroy the American people, our country, and the world, and also the Ukrainians, so that we can save Ukraine's democracy. I mean, it literally is insane. And the crazy thing, Tucker, is Senator Wicker is not an outlier. He's the number 2 Republican on the Armed Services Committee, and you're hearing the same kind of rhetoric coming from Democrats and Republicans, yes, in Congress, in the administration, and in the media, who have no problem with this because they actually agree with it. They're pushing this same narrative themselves, and this is why it is such a dangerous situation that we are facing as we are being pushed closer and closer very quickly, as you said, to a hot war, a nuclear war that would destroy the world as we know it.
Over eastern Ukraine, I mean, the sad thing is in Washington, I mean, you served in the Congress, people like Roger Wicker are considered highly informed intellectuals. You know, America deserves better than Roger Wicker, I think it's fair to say. But they live in an airless world where they repeat back to one another, both parties, the same stupid talking points. Do they know how disconnected from reality this is?
Unfortunately, it doesn't appear to be the case, and this is just points to their ineptness, their lack of a capability to really clearly see what the consequences are of their rhetoric, of what the actions. And this isn't just empty words. There are consequences to leaders in our country, influential people in our country, to throwing things out like a first-use nuclear attack is on the table. This directly undermines our national security. It directly puts the American people and our country and the world at risk, Tucker. And what are we trying to accomplish here? Because that will be the result.
And this is a much longer conversation, but in a minute, why eastern Ukraine? I mean, you can think of lots of parts of the world that are critical to our national interests. Shipping lanes in the South China Sea, for example, or lots of things you could argue we have to defend this. But Ukraine? We've been talking about Ukraine for years. What is this?
The thing that I see here, Tucker, that is the same neocons and neolibs in Washington who dragged our country into regime change wars in places like Iraq and Libya and Syria, the same ones who are pushing us very quickly into this war with Russia and never stating once, hey, what's our objective? What are we trying to accomplish here? And how does it serve our country's national security interests?
Exactly.
Not a single one of them are pointing that out.
This is not some Stone Age land in South Asia. This is a real country with nuclear weapons and an actual army. Like these,
exactly.
Is too crazy.
And by the way, they have more nuclear weapons than we do. So thinking you're just going to launch a nuclear attack and not see a consequence that will lead to a nuclear war that destroys the world is, again, insane, inept, and I don't know how many more words we can use to describe it. It's ridiculous, and these people should not be in positions of power to make these decisions.
I couldn't agree more. I also have run out of adjectives. But I agree with the ones you use. Tulsi Gabbard, great to see you. Thank you.
Okay. So, why are they bringing this up? And would they really do it? Well, they're bringing it up because the dollar is collapsing and nuclear war might be the only thing capable of keeping them in office. Yes, they would absolutely do this. It might be posturing for the moment, but the seed has been planted, and every story delegitimizing the authority of American liberalism is a rainstorm on that seed. All it needs to take root and blossom is a little sun. I heard speculation that China may invade Taiwan and Russia, Ukraine during the Olympic ceremonies in Beijing. Personally, I'm surprised China didn't invade Taiwan the day they got Joe Biden into the White House. And it would have given them a good deal of leverage against old Joe, having hundreds of young American athletes under Chinese guard at the start of an invasion. So I'll be watching the Olympics next year, but not for the games. Next story. 2 major school shootings in 2 months. In shooting A 15-year-old named Ethan Crumbley shot 10 students and 1 teacher, killing 4 students in Michigan. He was charged as an adult with terrorism causing death, first-degree murder, assault with intent to murder, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, with the possibility of more charges being added as the investigation continues. He currently sits in jail until trial. His parents were also charged with involuntary manslaughter, first time that's ever happened. And after a week-long manhunt, they were found hiding in a Detroit basement and arrested by FBI agents. There was essentially no talk of what drove him to commit this act. The point of focus for the media, instead, is that school administrators and his parents knew he was a risk before it happened and did nothing. In shooting B, an 18-year-old named Timothy Simpkins shot 3 students and was charged with 3 counts of assault with a deadly weapon in Texas. He was released on bond within a few days. His family made multiple TV appearances where they claimed he was the victim of bullying, and one of the shooting victims may face charges for bullying the shooter. Information that the shooter was actually selling weed and was in fact robbed, not bullied, has since come to light. One of these shooters is black, and the other is white. Can you guess the race of each school shooter based on this information? Well, if the white privilege narrative is true, obviously, shooter A must be black, and America must be up to its old racist tricks. This is the first time a school shooter has been charged with terrorism, and the prosecutor's rationale sounds like the typical BS to extend a quote-unquote undesirable person's prison sentence. From The Guardian, it reads, McDonald, the Oakland County prosecutor, said 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley, who was charged as an adult, had clearly set out to kill or injure as many people as he could during the rampage at Oxford High School in suburban Detroit that left 4 students dead and 7 others, including a teacher, wounded. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is, McDonald told CNN, conceding there is no playbook about how to prosecute a school shooting. True, but how is this different from what happens in nearly every other school shooting? None of those school shooters were charged as terrorists, and none of their parents were charged with anything. Clearly, the prosecutor is doing this because he knows American society doesn't care about this black family, and he'll be rewarded by his bosses for getting more black slaves for the prison industrial complex. Clearly, they'd never make such an unprecedented increase in punishments if he'd been white. He'd probably just get to go right on home like Shooter B in Texas did, whose parents didn't have to go on the run. They got to get up in front of the cameras and blame the victim. And of course, the system was on their side because they're white, and the cops actually talked about charging a black student he shot with bullying. No one even asked how this white devil got a gun. Oh wait, what? Shooter A is white, and Shooter B was black? So they charged the white 15-year-old as an adult with terrorism, and his white parents are in jail for giving him the gun, charged with involuntary manslaughter, and they let the 18-year-old black shooter go home? But that would mean the American media and school system has been lying to us. No! What's next? The medical industry? Next thing you know, they'll be telling me that Oxycontin actually is addictive and the vaccines aren't safe or effective. Shocker. Now let's listen to a local news report about this story that came out a few weeks, actually shortly after, a little while after, the shooting took place.
Mansfield ISD school are again claiming the accused shooter was bullied, despite the police chief saying that had nothing to do with it. Last week, Arlington's police chief said shooting suspect 18-year-old Timothy Simpkins was not being bullied, but was involved in, quote, high-risk behaviors outside the classroom. So far, neither the Simpkins attorneys or police have provided any public evidence supporting either of those claims. Fox Sports' Stephen Dial has an update tonight. Stephen.
Steve, the lawyers representing Simpkins challenged the chief's statement multiple times today in a press conference, but like you mentioned, not really answering any questions directly or giving any proof. After Arlington Police Chief Al Jones said the shooting at Timberview High School was not due to bullying, lawyers for the alleged gunman, Timothy Simpkins, held a press conference.
I have an extensive amount of evidence to the contrary.
Last week at Mansfield ISD's Safety Town Hall, Chief Jones told parents he wanted to take what he calls a bullying narrative out of the equation.
We can't and we won't say that there was any evidence of bullying that day or any other day. Mr. Simpkin is involved in high-risk activity, and that high-risk activity led to the disagreement within the community.
The shooting on October 6th at Mansfield ISD's Timberview High School, which is in the city of Arlington, happened following a fight between the 18-year-old Simpkins and 15-year-old Zacchaeus Selby. Police say after teachers and coaches broke up the fight, Simpkins shot Selby multiple times. Selby was unarmed. Calvin Pettit, who was a teacher, was also shot, and another teen was grazed. Police say Simpkins brought the gun to school in his book bag. Chief Jones would not explain what alleged high-risk activity Simpkins was involved in. When Simpkins' attorneys were asked about possible high-risk activity, they would not confirm or deny any involvement, choosing to avoid answering the question directly.
When Mr. Simpkins was brutally attacked, he was sitting in a classroom doing his schoolwork. That is not high-risk activity.
The defense team would also not explain what specifics of evidence they claim to have supporting their allegations of bullying, only saying it's in multiple forms.
All of the above. Text messages, social media, video, emails, yes, Snapchats, all of that.
As to why they wouldn't give more information,
there are pending charges, and any evidence that could be presented in the court should be first presented in the court before it's presented to the public.
attorneys took questions but did not explain where Simpkins allegedly got the gun. They also did not provide documentation that bullying involving Simpkins and Selby were reported to the school or the district. Last week at the town hall, Mansfield ISD told parents they have no record of bullying reports from Timberview.
There is evidence to controvert those statements.
Now, Arlington police say this is an ongoing and open investigation, so more details could come at any moment. Also, the attorneys representing Simpkins say that they have contacted the Arlington Police Department to ask why aren't charges being filed against the person who is fighting Simpkins.
Yes, we need to prosecute the guy who got shot multiple times. Can you imagine if a white mother had said that? How often she'd be getting called a fucking Karen? I mean, I really don't have a problem with the Ethan Crumblay kid's parents getting charged because there was a lot of evidence that this kid was about to fucking snap. Buying him a gun was incredibly stupid. But what I have a problem with is that they didn't do that to the kid in Texas. You know, they wouldn't do it to him because they're afraid of possibly getting called racist. So they're not even willing to come out and admit that, yeah, he was a drug dealer. No, they can't even say that. Alright. Next story. The murder of 14-year-old Ryan Rogers in Florida. This case, like the Christmas Parade massacre, is another hate crime not being recorded as a hate crime because the victim was white. This is the result of the popularization of the white privilege narrative, which encourages blacks to dehumanize whites as oppressors and themselves as oppressed. The more that narrative permeates society, the more it's going to reach people like this guy, a homeless drifter with a long history of violence. Let's listen to this story from 1090 Jake on his channel End of Sentence on YouTube.
Man, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of EOS. It's 1090 Jake, man. I'm rocking with y'all, and y'all rocking with me. For this video, we're going to be speaking on a controversial case out of Florida. A 14-year-old boy was brutally stabbed, and police are saying it was a random attack, but others are saying it was a hate crime. November 15th, 2021, it was 6:40 in the evening when 14-year-old Ryan Rogers took his bike for a ride in his Palm Beach Gardens neighborhood. It would be the last time he ever rode that bike, and the last time he was seen alive. Roughly 4 hours passed before his mother reported him missing to law enforcement, fear consuming her thoughts. As time went by with no word from police and no signs of her son. Neighbors, friends, and surrounding communities would volunteer to help search for the teen, and the following morning, his body was found. He laid by a bike in a wooded area out of plain sight, and approximately 24 feet from the sidewalk on Central Boulevard near the I-95 overpass. News of his death sent devastating waves through the community, and limited details were released by police. Ryan was only a freshman, his school addressing his death to students and families and what they described as a tragic accident. As many assumed, this was a hit and run.
But in the days to come, the evil that hid in the darkness slowly crawled to the light. Investigators were able to recreate the path traveled by Ryan, and almost an hour after he left home at approximately 7:30 p.m., he rode his bike on the Interstate 95 overpass. 1 minute later, his cell phone data would reveal he stopped traveling. Nearby video surveillance showed a single individual walking on Central Boulevard sidewalk at 7:20 p.m. He was heading in the direction of the victim, and the distance between the two was calculated by investigators, estimating they would have crossed paths at 7:31. An autopsy was conducted on Ryan's body, revealing he was repeatedly stabbed in his face and stabbed in his head, his manner of death being ruled a homicide. A pair of headphones were found at the scene of the murder, and contact with Ryan's family would reveal they didn't belong to him. The forensics unit swabbed the headphones for DNA, which was then submitted into a database, where a positive match identified the suspect. Sammy Williams Jr., a 39-year-old homeless drifter, had a long history of random acts of violence spanning 3 different states. From 21 to 24 years old, he'd be arrested 8 different times in Seminole County, Florida, for charges ranging from domestic violence battery, carrying a concealed weapon, and violating a protection order against a domestic violence victim. In 2014, he'd be arrested in Fulton County, Georgia, and according to the court records, charged with aggravated assault by strangulation and battery on a person 65 years or older. His victim would describe in a news interview being attacked at random, thrown in a ditch, and strangled as Semi had his knee in his back, pinning him to the ground. Semi had allegedly told him he didn't want his money, he knew his type, and wanted to finish him.
Very sorry this has happened. It should be dead. It should be alive.
News of Ryan Rogers' murder has Dennis Brink looking back 7 years, when the man accused of killing Rogers ambushed him on an Atlanta sidewalk, tried to strangle him to death, and tossed him into a ditch.
He's a killing machine. And I know what he does is he stakes it out, he hides, and somebody comes along, he throws him off guard, and then he just finishes him and he gets this intense pleasure, just brutalizing. Sorry, I tried to get this guy put away, and they wouldn't help me.
The victim was saved by someone who happened to be walking by at the time, scaring him off, and Semi was facing up to 20 years in prison, spending 3 years in the Fulton County jail where he wrote strange letters to the judge, claiming he was being raped by inmates, targeted by jail staff, and was even injected with an STD. In another letter, he claimed to have been raped over 10 times with a piece of metal, his food drugged, and 3 teeth knocked out of his mouth. Facing up to 21 years in prison for his crimes, the judge accepted Semi's request for first offender treatment based on the fact that he had no felony convictions, sentencing him to 5 years in prison with 3 years credit for his time in jail and mental institutions. Semi would be released in the next 24 months. December 1st, 2021, Semi Williams was taken into custody in Miami. He had a YouTube channel which has since been deleted, and police were able to use it while tracking him down, as he took videos around Miami and specifically at a non-profit that served the homeless. He'd allegedly traveled from Palm Beach to Miami by the Tri-Rail, and at the time of his arrest, he was in possession of a green backpack. Inside of the backpack was a green bandana with what appeared to be bloodstains. Forensics would confirm it was blood belonging to 2 people, Semi Williams and Ryan Rogers. Semi was charged with first-degree murder, but the motive still remains a mystery. Was he robbing Ryan for his bike, or was he targeting white victims, as some have started to claim? But the police, they're stating this was truly a random act of violence. This guy obviously has a history of mental health issues, and you can tell that just by reading the fucking letters he was writing to the judge. But he was not all the way there. In his YouTube videos, he basically spoke on these conspiracy theories that this world organization of police were after him, tracking him, and people are allegedly saying he was now pinned for this murder. But the amount of evidence in this case, it's like, who else would it have fucking been? They found headphones at the scene of the murder that had his DNA. They found him 11 days or however many days later in Miami with a bandana that had the kid's blood. And then they have him on video walking towards where the murder took place before it even happened. I don't know what else they need for a fucking conviction. My whole thing is this. If someone is deemed mentally ill and can't control themselves, that means the responsibility lies on someone else, right? The judge in Atlanta had the option to give him up to 21 years, ended up giving him 5 to 3 already served. Had he been given 8, this murder would have never happened. Had he been given to a mental institution, this possibly still could have been prevented. I don't understand who was responsible for him at the time, but he was homeless. And in a report, it basically stated this guy was a danger to everyone, and all that happened was that danger was just sent to a different jurisdiction. Judge in Atlanta, hey, give him 2 years and let him out, and wherever he goes, he goes. We see this in a lot of different cases where people claim there's a mental health issue or they have all these problems which led to what happened, but for this specific case, he needs to be held accountable. He doesn't need to get out anymore because obviously he can't control himself, and whoever had responsibility over him, even that judge in Atlanta, needs to be held accountable. They just held accountable to 2 parents that basically gave access to a kid to go shoot up a school.
Story I was just talking
You
about.
got someone that's crazy, and you know they're crazy, and you let them out, whatever happens falls on you, right? Because they're not responsible for themselves. But let me know what y'all think in the comment section. Let me hear y'all's thoughts and opinions. It's 1090J. I'm rocking with y'all. Y'all rocking with me. Until next.
Alright. Unfortunately, this was always the aim of spreading this narrative. It was created and has been propagated by people so hateful towards others because of their white skin, they had to change the definition of racism to allow the quote-unquote anti-racist to continue treating whites in what would otherwise be an unquestionably racist manner. Reading from the New York Times article, Merriam-Webster revises racism entry after Missouri woman asks for changes by Christine Hauser on November 3rd, 2021, saying Kennedy Mitchum, 22, said the dictionary definition needed to be expanded to include systemic racism. The dictionary's editors agreed. This is the clearest irony of all. Merriam-Webster changed their definition of the word racism to include institutional racism as definition 2A, which changes it from being something anyone is capable of being to something only white people can do. It reads as such: the systemic oppression of a racial group to the social, economic, and political advantage of another, specifically white supremacy. They did this because of a 22-year-old female student's complaint. According to Miss Mitchum, and now Merriam-Webster, racism is not only prejudice against a certain race due to the color of the person's skin, it is both prejudice combined with social and institutional power. End quote. If you ask me, getting Merriam-Webster to change the meaning of words to allow you to continue being prejudiced is a pretty serious flex of social and institutional power. In fact, if it weren't for the specifically white supremacy line at the end there, I'd say even by your own new definition, you're still racist. I guarantee that if I wrote to Merriam-Webster and asked them to change the definition of any word, not only would the New York Times, Vox, and The Atlantic not talk about it, but they wouldn't even respond. Please continue to tell me how privileged I am and how oppressed you are. Continue to be so horribly self-unaware. BLM is the new KKK. Black supremacy is the new white supremacy. And just like white supremacy, back in the day, a lot of people are supporting it without even knowing it. Alright, everybody. There's a lot more going on out there in the world. The vaccine mandate is got shot down in the Senate. Thank God. Inflation is going completely insane. But that's all the time we have for today. So, take care of yourself out there. Share this with people. I would really appreciate that more than anything. Is share this with people. Get the word out. I don't think I'm special. I don't want to be doing this. Believe me, I'm the laziest person you will ever meet in your life. But this shit is important. They're trying to turn us all against each other. They're trying to turn blacks against the whites, and the whites into the Jews of the 1930s. And I would know. I'm a Jew. Or Jewish. I'm a quarter Jew. That's all the time we got for today, people. Take care of yourselves. Buy a gun.